In psychology, Mary Ainsworth investigated different attachment types that people develop with their mother or their other primary attachment figure when they were very young. Mary Ainsworth used something called the strange situation to investigate attachment types, and the strange situation is a psychological observational technique which involves very young children aged between 9 and 18 months old. So they would go into a room with their mother that they'd never been in before, and so obviously the room is strange to them, but it had toys in it which the children found attractive. What I recommend is that you have a look in the link in the description below to see the strange situation. It's only a couple of minutes of video that shows you how the strange situation was, the setup of it, and you can see the different children in that. So the observation is a controlled observation, and that meant the setup and procedure was exactly the same each time the child is investigated. The observers watch through a two-way mirror, and they are specifically looking at 4 different behaviours. And these behaviours indicate the strength of the attachment the child has to the mother. So the behaviours are willingness to explore, which means seeing whether the child can use their mother as a secure base to explore their new environment. Separation anxiety, which was seeing how the child responds when the mum leaves the room for a few minutes. Stranger anxiety, which is looking at how a child responds when a stranger enters the room and tries to engage with them. And reunion behaviour, which is looking at how the child responds when the mother returns to the room. Ainsworth analysed how the children responded in the different behavioural categories, and from that she identified patterns of behaviour that indicated 3 different ways a child could be attached to their mother. She identified them as secure, insecure-avoidant and insecure-resistant. Most of the children were securely attached, and in the strange situation that meant that they were willing to explore their environment because they could use their mother as a secure base. They had mild stranger anxiety, which is what they should have. They had moderate distress towards the stranger. They had mild separation anxiety, so when their mum left the room they would cry a little bit, but they wouldn't be too desperate. The reunion behaviour, so when the mum came back in the room, they might have cried a little bit, but they were pleased to see her and easily comforted, and they soon went back to playing. Ainsworth said that for a child to be securely attached, then the mother would have responded quickly, sensitively and consistently to the child's needs when they were very, very little. And importantly, that secure feeling would stay with the child throughout their life. So as adults, they are secure people. They are ready for new, loving relationships and friendships. 22% of the infants were classified as insecure-avoidant in the strange situation. So in the observation, then they were willing to explore because they preferred playing with objects rather than interacting with their mum. They had little response when the mother left the room, so low separation anxiety. They had low stranger anxiety because they responded to the stranger in the same way as they responded to their mother. And with the reunion behaviour, so when the mother came back in the room, there was little reaction. If the mother picked the child up, they would look down and avoid eye contact. And Ainsworth believed that for a child to become insecure-avoidant, that the mother would have mostly been disengaged when the child was very young, showing little or no response to her child, so a lot of neglect going on. And as adults, people with an insecure attachment, an insecure-avoidant attachment, would remain insecure-avoidant as adults. So they would avoid loving relationships and new friendships, and they would avoid anything that resembled that closeness to being with somebody which they didn't experience as a child. 12% of children were classified as insecure-resistant. So in the strange situation, they were not really willing to explore because they were anxious even with the mother present. They would seek the mother and reject the mother's attention, and so they couldn't use her as a secure base. They had very high separation anxiety, so when the mother left, they were absolutely distraught. They had very high stranger anxiety and weren't easily comforted by anybody. And the reunion behaviour is the most interesting because when the mother came back, you would think that the child would be absolutely delighted to see her return because the child had been so distressed when she left. But the reunion behaviour was just really poor. The child would be incredibly distressed when the mother returned. They could not be easily soothed or comforted by the mother. They both wanted the mother and rejected her at the same time. And insecure-resistant attachment type is sometimes called insecure-ambivalent or insecure-anxious because they want the mother but they resist the mother. If they're ambivalent, they want it and they don't want it at the same time. Ainsworth believed for someone to become insecure resistant that the mother would have been inconsistent in her care for her baby, for her very young child. So sometimes she would have been really sensitive and lavished the child with attention, and sometimes she would have been neglectful. And it's that inconsistent behaviour by the mum that has left the child completely insecure. They know what love is and they want it and they crave it, but they don't trust it. So in the strange situation when the mother left, the child was absolutely distraught because they didn't trust or feel secure enough that their mother was going to return. When the mother did return, you would think that they would be like over the moon, but they were angry and upset. They wanted the mother and resisted her at the same time. As adults, that insecure resistant attachment type could have spilled into adult behaviour. So people who are insecure resistant crave love and attention because they know what it is. They're constantly looking for love. They fall head over heels in love really quickly, hence the love bombing. But when they get it, oh my gosh, it makes them feel so incredibly uncomfortable. As soon as somebody starts responding positively and reciprocating their loving, then they feel uncomfortable. They feel unconsciously, they don't realise, they feel like they need to sabotage and push that person away because they just don't trust it. So people who are insecure resistant are most likely to have affairs. They're most likely to get divorced because they are falling in love really quickly, but then they are sabotaging. Once they have ghosted someone or put them off, they're left, once the dust has settled and after like a few weeks and they feel calm again, then they might feel lonely and looking for love again because they are really wanting that love. And so the cycle continues. Once you've outlined the strange situation in terms of identifying the attachment types, then you will probably need to evaluate, especially if it's a 12 marker. So the first evaluation point is a criticism of the original theory. So Ainsworth's original theory, the original strange situation observation, found there were 3 attachment types. However, Main and Solomon reanalysed over 200 videos of the strange situation and proposed a 4th attachment type called Insecure-Disorganised. So Main and Solomon are criticising that original research, saying, look, you've missed another attachment type. It's called Insecure-Disorganised, and it means these children show a lack of clear attachment behaviour, and their actions and responses to caregivers are often a mix of behaviours, including avoidance or resistance. And they're described as displaying dazed behaviour in the strange situation, sometimes seeming either confused or apprehensive in the presence of a caregiver. These children lacked a coherent strategy for dealing with the stress of separation, and they showed very strong attachment behaviour, which is suddenly followed by avoidance or looking fearfully towards the caregiver, or displaying odd movements like stumbling, but only when that caregiver is present. The reason for the insecure disorganised attachment type, according to Main and Hess, is because the children have experienced some form of abuse from their parent, from that primary caregiver, either the mother or whoever looks after them. And if a child is feeling both comforted and frightened by the parent at the same time, then of course confusion results, and they would, in the strange situation, they don't have that coherent strategy for dealing with separation. They don't feel secure, and they need the mother and they want the mother, but they're also frightened of the mother. And so Main and Hess argued that it's these parents who act as both figures of fear and reassurance to a child contribute to a disorganised attachment style. A strength of the strange situation in determining attachment types is that the observations had high reliability. If you're not sure what reliability in psychology means, and especially if you don't know what inter-observer reliability means, then at the end of this video I will explain those elements. But for this evaluation point, what you need to know is that Ainsworth et al. Found a correlation coefficient of 0.94 agreement between observers, which is an almost perfect correlation coefficient, showing that the observations themselves had high reliability. So what that means is that when the children were observed in the strange situation, there would have been 2 observers watching, and they would have been measuring the behaviour in the behavioural categories, which you remember are stranger anxiety, separation anxiety, willingness to explore, and reunion behaviour. And then the 2 observers would have compared their results, and they found that they had a 0.94 correlation coefficient between their results, really high, showing that the children really were displaying the behaviour that these observers said. So there was no bias involved. The strange situation was a really well-controlled observational technique that showed high reliability. Another strength of the strange situation is that the findings of it have been used in the real world and they have been applied in the real world. So there's the Circle of Security project, and I've put a link in the description below where you can go to the website and have a look at it. It's a project that aims to teach parents how to be the best parents they can be that would provide a secure attachment with their own child. And so they've used that research by Ainsworth in order to create a training program for people to show them how to be a secure base for their child to explore the world, and how to be a safe haven for their child, that someone that their child can always rely on, that consistent reliability, because that provides the secure attachment. So Cooper et al. Found that parents who took part in the course then increased secure attachments went from 32% to 40%, and it reduced disordered parents from 60% to 15%. So if you remembered those insecure, disordered attachment types where the parent might have been quite abusive, there was a huge reduction in that attachment type from parents taking part in the Circle of Security. So it's a strength because it shows how that research can be applied, and that means that the research works. It's a really beneficial programme. If you're my students, then all the directed study is on the directed study forum on Moodle, and I'm just going to give you a structure for how to do task 4, which is describe and evaluate the strange situation. In the exam, if it said describe and evaluate the strange situation, or it said describe and evaluate research to show the different attachment types, 12 marks, then AO1 description will be 6 marks and AO3 evaluation will be 6 marks. So in the description, you would need to outline the strange situation, including what it aimed to investigate, the research method, meaning that it was a controlled observation, the procedure, so what exactly went on, but you don't have to go into huge detail, but the fact that it was a strange room for the child with toys, there were different episodes that took part, including the mother going out and coming back in, etc. So just a kind of overview of the procedure of what happened. Make sure you include the behavioural categories that were being measured and the findings of Ainsworth's original study. So the fact that 66% were classified as secure, 22% were insecure-avoidant and 12% were insecure-resistant. Because you've only got 6 marks, you don't necessarily have to go into any detail about the future. So although you might say an insecure-avoidant child would have been neglected by their parent and would display this kind of behaviour, you wouldn't have to go on and explain about their behaviour as adults. It's purely like what happened in the strange situation in order to determine the different attachment types. Once you've described the strange situation, then you would need to go on to evaluate it. So everything we've just looked at in this video, the limitations of it, the strengths of it, split the evaluation points into different paragraphs and make sure you tell the examiners whether it's a strength or a limitation of it. So for example, I would come in with a criticism of the strange situation is that Main and Solomon identified a 4th attachment type that wasn't identified during that original research. And then I would go on to explain about the insecure disorganised attachment type. So you've got the 3 evaluation points there. If you're in the second year, then you would need at least another 1 or 2, and you might look at issues, debates and approaches, or you might look at more to do with the research methodology to give you those extra evaluation points. Reliability in psychology is to do with consistency. So if you repeated an investigation, would you get similar results? And if you do, then you can say that the investigation is reliable. One of the evaluation points of the strange situation is that it had high reliability. And what this was talking about was about the reliability of the observations taken by the observer. So if another observer repeated the investigation, would they make similar observations? And the only way we can really be sure is to test the reliability of those observers, and we would test the reliability of an observation through inter-observer reliability. So inter-observer reliability requires 2 or more observers to carry out the following 3 steps. Step 1, they would agree behavioural categories, and in the strange situation they had agreed on the 4 behavioural categories. Why don't you pause the video and see if you can remember the behavioural categories. Step 2 is that the observers observe the same situation independently and tally the data, which means every time they see something occurring in one of the behavioural categories, they would make a tally. Step 3 is for the two observers to compare their data, and then they would use a Spearman's row inferential statistical test to see if their data correlates by 0.8 or more. If it does, then it's reliable. And what that means, that correlation coefficient of 0.8 means that they are pretty much in 80% agreement in what they have seen. That's acceptable. So when you looked at the strange situation, they had a correlation coefficient of 0.94, which is almost perfect. The perfect correlation is 1.0, and that means that you would be 100% in agreement with the other observer. But 0.94 is indicating it's like 94% agreement between the observers. And so the strange situation had high reliability, it had high inter-observer reliability. The people who were watching and investigating the same children agreed with each other on what they thought they were seeing, which is a strength of the investigation.